Oh boy, I'm gonna have to talk about Shane Wright, aren't I? Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we are going through every single NHL team and picking their most disappointing player a month and a half into the NHL season. Now, with the NHL season still being in its early days, I wanted to go through every single team to see which players are underperforming, which players should be playing much better, and just aren't doing as well as they should. Now, when it comes to your favorite team and every team across the league, who do I see as the most disappointing player? Well, make sure you watch till the end for every single pick and hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys are subscribed, so hit that subscribe button if you like hockey content just like this. So let's get straight into the video, and we're going to start out with the Pacific Division here and go through all the divisions, and how I have them ordered is just through the standings. So we're going to start with the best teams in each division and go through the lesser teams in each. And let's start off with the top team in the Pacific with the Vegas Golden Knights. And honestly, with how well they're playing, it was extremely hard to actually pick a player here, but I'm going to go with Phil Kessel. Now, at age 35, still his production is pretty good considering his age, with 6 points in 15 games, but considering how effective he was last year with the Coyotes, getting 44 assists, 52 points in 82 games played, I thought he was going to be a really good fit with this Vegas team. And so far, even though he's played solid compared to the rest of the Vegas Golden Knights big forwards, he's been relatively disappointing, and I think that's a little bit of a shame, but I think he will get going for sure in the second half of the year especially. Next up, I'm going to go on to the LA Kings most disappointing player, and this is kind of a player that I guess doesn't count because he's not even with the Kings right now, but I gotta go with Quinton Byfield, who's now in the AHL with the Ontario Reign, but of course turned 20 this last August, and I had some big expectations for him. Maybe not to get the best ice time in the world, considering of course the Kings' top two centers are still Kopitar and Danault for the foreseeable future, but I expected him to be at least an everyday NHL player this year, but that just was not the case. He only played 8 games, got 3 assists, 3 points. I thought looked solid, but of course was sent down to the AHL and likely is going to get a lot more playing time there. I still don't think we're at a point where we should get a panic button situation for Byfield, but at the same time, it's not exactly what you want to see with the former second overall pick. But next up, let's go on to another high-profile young forward. Next up, let's go on to the Seattle Kraken's most disappointing player, and kind of like Byfield, I think in some situations it's a little bit disappointing because of the situation he was put in, but I'm gonna go with the Seattle Kraken's most disappointing player in Shane Wright, who of course was drafted 4th overall, and to me, when it comes to Wright, even though I don't blame him necessarily for only getting 1 point in 7 games, he's playing like 8 minutes a night, it feels like, every single time. At the same time, it doesn't feel like this is what his first year should really be, and I feel like, yes, the Kraken do have a lot of blame for this situation, and I think they should have a lot of blame because they have handled this situation horribly. If you're not going to play him, just have him in the OHL. It's not like he was truly dominant in his draft year. I mean, he was great, getting 94 points in 63 games, but I thought there were still some things to learn if he went back there, and to me, I mean, the Kraken have just handled him absolutely horribly, and again, I don't blame him necessarily, but at the same time, the whole situation is just disappointing to me. But now let's go on to another younger player. Next up with the Edmonton Oilers, most disappointing player up to this point. I was considering maybe going for a Warren Fogle, but he's been playing a little bit better the last week, so I decided to go with Dylan Holloway, who I expected to be maybe in the Calder conversation, maybe not up to that point, but have a really successful true rookie year. And you see up to this point in 11 games, he has 2 assists, 2 points, and hasn't been nearly as energetic as I thought he would be. I feel like the speed is a little bit lacking, and just the consistency has not been there so far, and that's a reason why he isn't getting much playing time, or at least consistently. And I think he's been fine, but that's kind of the problem. He's not really pushing pace as much as I thought he would, and at 21, it's just a little bit concerning, and I do feel like even though he will get better over the course of the season, this definitely wasn't the rookie year that I and most people were expecting to see. But now let's move on to easily one of the most disappointing players so far this season, and a big reason why I think the Calgary Flames have been so inconsistent this year. Let's go on to, of course, Jonathan Huberdeau, who has had a great start to his Calgary Flames career, for sure. Getting 6 points in 11 games, 1 goal, 5 assists. And even though I think in the last couple of games he's had his best games as a Calgary Flame, so I don't think we're going to see this slump continue necessarily, still, the fact that, of course, the big fish for the Flames was Huberdeau, and with how well Nazem Kadri has done, to me, there's a lot less excuses coming Huberdeau's way, especially, of course, with the big contract extension that he signed before even playing a game with the Calgary Flames. So to me, with Huberdeau, of course, what we saw last year, 115 points in 80 games, I wasn't expecting him to replicate that production, but still be around a 90, 100 point pace, and that has just been woefully incorrect. And we've just seen, especially in his time with Calgary, just how inconsistent, especially defensively, he's been, and that's been a big reason why his on-ice impact has been so disappointing in all three zones, which has been really unfortunate to see with the Flames. But next up, let's go on to another player that has kind of synced his team in his disappointingness so far this year, in Thatcher Demko, who last year, in a lot of ways, when the Canucks were playing well, was a player carrying them so much. And at age 26, even though I didn't expect him to have an amazing year, because I didn't see the Canucks doing so well to be a playoff team, I still expected him to be solid. And of course, you saw last year in 64 games, getting a big workload, got a 915 save percentage, and was great in that second half stretch with the Canucks. But this year, in 10 games, a 4.01 goals against average, an 874 save percentage. And according to Canucks reporter Rick Dhaliwal, apparently he is dealing with something in the lower body. So it really makes sense that he's injured, because he has just been a complete mess. He doesn't look right. His mechanics are all off, and that's led to a lot of Canucks losses. But next up, let's go on to another goaltender, another American goaltender that is disappointing me this year in the Anaheim Ducks, in John Gibson. Now, John Gibson, to me, at this point, is the most overrated goalie in the NHL, and it's not even a competition. He hasn't been a good goalie since 2019, and the last year, in 58 games, got a 917 save percentage, but you see since then, a 904, a 903, a 904, and now an 888 save percentage. And yes, the Anaheim Ducks defense hasn't been good in front of him, but he also hasn't risen above that. I mean, a good example is kind of like a Thatcher Demko, where last year, even though the Canucks were still playing at an inconsistent rate, even when they were playing good, Thatcher Demko was saving them in every single way. And I just don't see that anymore with John Gibson, which is truly unfortunate, because he was one of the best goalies in the mid-2010s. But now let's move on to another forward that to me has regressed so incredibly, and it's just disappointing to see, in all honesty. Let's go on to the San Jose Sharks' most disappointing player easily, in Kevin Labanc. Now, I really need to stop raising my expectations with Labanc, because every single time since really 2019, he's kind of disappointed me. But you see that 2019 season, I was extremely high on him after that year, because I loved what I saw with his pace pushing and how impactful every single shift was from him. And I didn't, even though I didn't see him replicating that production, I saw him still being a great player for the Sharks in the future. But then you see in 2020, 33 points, in 2021, 28 points, then missing a ton of time in 2022, only getting 6 points in 21 games. And so far, he's been fine. He's got 7 points in 15 games, which is better, but I want to see him back at that amazing production. And so far, we haven't quite seen that. But now let's move on to the disappointing players in the Central Division, and we start with the Winnipeg Jets, a team that has been rolling in all fronts. And it was genuinely hard to choose a player for them, so I go with Nate Schmidt here. I still think he's been fine, but in terms of his offensive production, only having 2 points in 12 games is a little bit disappointing. But again, even that isn't that big of a deal for a D-man, so I think for the Jets, it's great news that Nate Schmidt is your most disappointing player. Next up, let's go on to the Dallas Stars, my Dallas Stars, and easily my most disappointing player is Denis Gurianov. At age 25, even though he has been better, he's gotten all of his 3 points this year in his last 5 games. Still, the impact level that I was expecting to see with Gurianov is just not there, especially with the hole the Stars have on that right wing, and with Peter DeBoer coming in, I thought Gurianov would be the perfect player to bounce back, to get in a great position after some really topsy-turvy years with Rick Bowness, but that has just not been the case, and especially his goal-scoring touch has completely evaporated. Now let's go on to the Colorado Avalanche most disappointing player, and to me, another younger player, but to me, an easy one here in Alex Newhook. Now, again, still 21 years old, so still relatively young, but this year, in 12 games, he has 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points, after 33 points last year, and that was with, of course, Kadri on that center core, for instance. He had way more competition on the team to have to deal with, yet this year, even with the limited ice time, he has done absolutely nothing with it. And to me, I saw coming into this year him getting a lot more opportunity. That didn't happen because of his relatively lackluster play, and to me, I think this year was a huge missed opportunity, or at least the start of this year has been a big missed opportunity for Newhook to really cement himself. Next up, let's go on to the Minnesota Wild, and a pretty big veteran for them that hasn't really been up to snuff, in my opinion, in Jonas Brodin. Now, watching some Minnesota Wild games, of course, with their topsy-turvy record not being as good as we really expected them to be, at least up to this point, they're still in a playoff spot, obviously, but haven't been as dominant. I think one of the big reasons maybe that defense hasn't been as good as you'd want it to be is Jonas Brodin's play. Now, of course, 2 points in 14 games, but as a defenseman, that's not the biggest deal. To me, when it comes to Brodin, there's been a lack of pace with him. There's been a lack of consistency, and that's really been the biggest thing. To me, I think he's one of the better defensemen in the entire league, and to me, when he's putting up lackluster results in his own end, that spells some big, disastrous results, and we've kind of seen how it's affected the entire Wild team so far. But now I'm going to move on to the Arizona Coyotes' most disappointing player, and most of the team is playing pretty well right now, but I got to go with Barrett Hayton, who at age 22 is another player I should just stop having any expectations for. Obviously was never going to fulfill that 5th overall potential, but I still saw him as a top 15 pick back in 2018, and so far you just look at what he's done. I mean, last year he got 24 points in 60 games. He looked decent, especially down the stretch in some key areas, and to me, I thought this year, obviously he wouldn't be putting up point per game numbers, but I thought we could see him around the same rate and using that overall game to his advantage. But in 13 games, he has 3 assists, 0 goals, 3 points, and has been a disastrous mess around a Coyotes team that actually is playing pretty well, which is the worst part. But now let's move on to the Chicago Blackhawks' most disappointing player, and easily for me, watching Chicago, it is Patrick Kane. It's not even a competition. Jonathan Toews has been outplaying Kane practically every single game this year, and that's kind of crazy to think about, especially considering Toews last season. But you see in 13 games, he has 2 goals, 8 assists, 10 points. It's not necessarily the production, but how he's playing offensively. Obviously, he's garbage defensively, and has been even more garbage defensively this year, but when you're not putting up the offensive production, when you're not even playing that well on the power play, for instance, I mean, since last year, 92 points in 78 games. Yes, he was garbage defensively, but the production in some ways could balance it out. This year, it just hasn't been the same way, and Jonathan Toews has been playing way better in almost every single way, which, with how much of a high-profile player Kane still is the most disappointing part. Now let's go on to the Nashville Predators, a team that has a multitude of disappointing options, but easily for me, it has to come with their starter in Juuse Saros, who I think was, coming into this year, one of the better starters, one of the better goalies in the entire league. And you see last year getting a big workload, a 918 save percentage in 67 games, and a big reason why the Preds were a playoff team. But this year in 10 games, an 892 save percentage, a 3-6-1 record, and it's just been really inconsistent in a lot of ways. And to me with Saros, that's really disappointing, especially considering how consistent he was last year and how good he was throughout a multitude of stretches. But to me with the Preds, I think the biggest reason for their disappointing start has been Saros being as just bad as he has. There's no better way to explain it. And then we go on to the St. Louis Blues' most disappointing player, and you could pretty much put almost everybody on this list, but to me, I feel like the most disappointing guy has got to be Jordan Kyrou, who got his big payday this last year and is going to be paid, of course, with after this next season with that extension, and we've seen how it's already kind of panned out. Not very good. But you see last year in 2022, he was excellent, extraordinary, and was one of the best pace pushers in the entire league. 75 points in 74 games, and 9 points, 7 goals in 12 playoff games. He was incredible throughout the entirety of last season. But this year, 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points in 12 games, and for a little bit, it was an even worse point per game stretch. He's gotten a little bit better this last week production-wise, but to me, it's not even just the production, it's the effort level out there. Sometimes it just feels like Kyrou is absolutely lost, which for a player that was above a point per game should not be happening, simply put. Now let's move on to the Metro Division and the disappointing players for each team. And for the New Jersey Devils, they are another team that has had some great success. But to me, easily, it has to be Alexander Holtz. At age 20, this was the year I thought he would jump into the lineup, be a full-time NHL player. Only played 4 games, got his first NHL goal, but has only done that so far. And I feel like it's a mistake that he's not with Utica right now, but just overall, his entire season has been extremely disappointing for a player that I thought would fit pretty well this year, and this would be the year to get that full-time NHL spot. But now let's go on to a goaltender that was among the best last year, and it's just been just awful this year so far in Freddie Andersen with the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, age 33, he is getting up there, but you see last year a .922 save percentage in 52 games, and this year in 8 games, he has an .891 save percentage. Now, the Canes have been so good offensively that he still has a 5-3-0 record, which obviously helps quite a bit. But even though I don't think the Canes defense has been as good as it should be, Freddie Andersen has just not been up to snuff. And right now, Antti Raanta is around a .910 save percentage, I believe, and playing a lot better in his games. And to me, with Andersen as a player that was supposed to be the starter still, it's been a really disappointing start. But now let's go on to the New York Islanders' most disappointing player. And to me, I'm going to go with Josh Bailey. Now, he so far in 14 games has 5 points, and to me, that is just simply not good enough. Now, even though I don't think he was an amazing player, he still got 44 points last year in 74 games, and to me, it just feels like Josh Bailey is just one of the guys on the Islanders, just one of the more irrelevant players there, which, especially with how much he's getting paid with $5 million, is not what you want to see. But now let's go on to the New York Rangers' most disappointing player. And there's a couple of really good options here, but I have to go with the captain in Jacob Trouba. Now, so far in terms of the stats, he got 39 points last year in 81 games and 4 assists so far, 4 points in 15 games. But it's not about the offense, it's about the defense so far, Trouba, which has been absolutely embarrassing to watch. Just embarrassing. And it's sad to see because Trouba was decent in a lot of ways last year, and even better than that in a lot of ways too, especially in the playoffs. But this season so far has been a disaster for him, and so far being the captain, he has not lived up, especially defensively, to what you want to see, and that's really affected Igor Shesterkin. It's affected a lot of players with how much he's playing and how bad he's been. But now let's go on to the Philadelphia Flyers' most disappointing player, and I'm gonna have to go with Travis Sanheim here, who going into this year was, I think, easily the best Flyers defenseman, but so far hasn't really played like it, which is interesting. In 13 games, he has 2 assists, 2 points, and John Tortorella brought up a great point, saying that for a puck-moving defenseman, he hasn't done nearly as much of it as you'd want to see, especially considering how many chances he's giving up when he's on the ice, and that to me is a great indication of what we see with Sanheim so far. Just a disappointing two-way game that has not lived up to the past hype. But now let's go on to the Washington Capitals next up, and their most disappointing player, I'm going to go with Connor McMichael. Another younger player that I expected, kind of like Alex Newhook, to get a better opportunity this next year, but has done nothing of the sort. Only has played 4 games, getting 0 points, has had 5 penalty minutes. But to me, with Mike Michael, I was expecting this to be a much better year for him. You, of course, see the first full NHL season last year, getting 18 points in 68 games, and I thought that was an okay rookie season to build upon and to continue to get better. But this year has just been a mess for him in his ice time and in his play, and for Washington, it doesn't feel like they have much of a plan for him this season, which is really disappointing to see. But now let's go on to another player that is kind of in the doghouse right now for very good reasons with the Pittsburgh Penguins. My most disappointing player has to be Kasperi Kapanen. They signed him to a $3.2 million deal this year and next, and let Evan Rodrigues go in free agency, and we're already seeing how bad of a decision that is for Pittsburgh. You see last year, 32 points in 79 games. I didn't even think he was all that good last year to get the contract that he got. I didn't think he was deserving. Then this season, only in 12 games, he has 5 points and has been healthy scratched 2 straight games. For being paid $3.2 million in his supposed prime at age 26, to let Evan Rodrigues go, Kasperi Kapanen has been worse than disappointing. He's been a disaster. But now let's go on to the last team in the Metro, one of the worst teams in the NHL this year, in the Columbus Blue Jackets. And my most disappointing player is going to be Elvis Merzlikins. Now, to me, when it comes to his play, last year we saw him get a full NHL season, and obviously his save percentage was going to dip a little bit, especially considering how bad the Blue Jackets defense was with a .907 save percentage. But this year in 8 games, he has an .863. And yes, the Columbus defense is horrible, but it's another situation kind of like John Gibson, where yes, the defense is bad, and that can be an excuse, but I want to see these goalies rise to the occasion and be better than that. If they want to be true NHL starters, I want to see them rise past their defense and be the best they can, and I just have not seen that with Merzlikins, and to me, I think he's been a big reason why the Blue Jackets have been so bad. It's not just the defense playing bad, it's Merzlikins playing bad, and that's the disappointing part. Alright, now let's move on to the last division in the Atlantic, and let's start off with the Boston Bruins, and to me, easily, it is Craig Smith, who has not only had the greatest stint so far with the Boston Bruins. You see in 2021, I thought he played pretty well there, getting 32 points in 54 games, half a point per game as well in the playoffs, but 2022, he was not easily a lot less consistent and wasn't as impactful shift to shift as you'd want to see. And then this year, in 9 games, he has 3 points. For how good the Bruins have been, Craig Smith has been a really weird blemish on the forward group. But now let's go on to the Florida Panthers, and this is a player that I absolutely see performing well in these next 70 games, if you want to say it. But to me, so far, Sam Reinhart's production has been extremely disappointing. You see last year in 78 games, 33 goals, 49 assists, 82 points, was lights out. But this year, only 5 points in 14 games. And to me, he might be the most snake-bitten player in the NHL right now, or at least it feels like that, because he's been still very, very good. And again, I see him doing really well and getting back in the same sort of production, but still for a player of his profile, to see that production is relatively disappointing. And now going on to the Detroit Red Wings' most disappointing player, I could have been really mean and go after Moritz Seider, but I didn't feel like that was completely fair. So I'm going to go with goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic. And I don't know what has happened, because with me personally, I was a huge fan of the trade for the Detroit Red Wings when it happened, going away from Carolina. I thought the Canes were making a huge mistake, and that has obviously gone completely wrong, and I take all the blame for that. So far with Detroit, he has been a disaster. In 59 games last year, a .901 save percentage. This year, in 5 games, an .880 save percentage. He was so bad last year that they immediately, in the next free agency window, went out and got another goaltender in Ville Husso, and he has been so much better in every single way. And to me, with Nedeljkovic, especially considering how good he was in the last couple of years he was with Carolina, in 23 games and .932 save percentage, to see this type of performance is just extremely sad to see. But now let's go on to the Toronto Maple Leafs and their most disappointing player, and I'm going to go with Michael Bunting. Now, I still think he's played pretty solid, but I just don't think there's nearly as much intensity or consistency shift to shift as there was last year. You see last season, 63 points in 79 games, and obviously he was a big beneficiary of Austin Matthews' unreal goal scoring, but I thought he was also a huge part of that line and really deserved those top line minutes. But this year, in 15 games, he has 6 points, and I just don't think he's nearly as impactful as he was, which, considering it's a contract year for him, is about the worst timing in human history. But now let's go on to the Tampa Bay Lightning's most disappointing player, and to me, it's obvious. It is easy. It is, for sure, Victor Hedman. And I'm a big Victor Hedman fan, but he has been bad this year. Just bad. And not even in terms of the production. 9 points in 12 games, still for a defenseman, is incredible. But defensively, Victor Hedman, to me, was one of the best defensemen coming into this year, if not the best defenseman in the entire league. And to me, this season, he's been garbage. He's just been garbage. He's been getting beaten in rushes. The speed is just not there. Letting opponents get right into the slot just with ease. And to me, it just doesn't feel like it's the Victor Hedman defensively that I know and love. Obviously, there's time to turn it around, but so far he's been a big reason why Vasilevsky's job has been a lot harder. But now we can move on to the Montreal Canadiens and their most disappointing player. There's been a lot of guys that have rose to the occasion, but Evgeny Dadonov is not one of those players. I thought he'd be a really interesting middle six piece for the Canadiens that would play well and would get shipped off at the deadline, but man, has he sucked. In 10 games, 0 points, and that's a great indication of Dadonov's game. Just completely irrelevant. But now let's go on to the Buffalo Sabres, who have had an unfortunate 4-game losing streak, and to me the most disappointing player is Peyton Krebs. Now, another younger player that still has a ton of time to turn around, obviously, but he'll be turning 22 in January, and considering how good he was down this stretch, of course, with the trade to Buffalo, getting 22 points in 48 games, I thought this was a big year in Krebs' development to get an even bigger season, be a full-time NHL player, and really cast the doubts away. But in 12 games, he has 2 2 assists, 0 goals, 2 points, and has just kind of been irrelevant on the ice. Kind of like Danov, you just haven't really noticed him too much, and to me, that's been a huge disappointment. Jack Quinn, who's getting scratched, has looked way better in my opinion, and I think Krebs has just been way too inconsistent to really warrant the full-time spot. But now let's go on to the last player here, and I'm going to go on to the Ottawa Senators. Their most disappointing player has to be Thomas Chabot, who at age 25 has not been nearly as good as he should. You see last year in 59 games, 38 points, was excellent offensively, and even took some steps ahead on defense, but this year has been a disaster. On top of his offense not being up to his usual self, 5 points in 13 games, defensively, he just has taken all the steps back and has been just horrible, especially in his own zone. And to me, with how important this year was for Ottawa to take that next step, with how bad Chabot has been on all sides, it's just sad to see, because he should be a player taking those big steps alongside the other Senators that are supposed to be taking those big steps that have just not happened this season. But that's going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below who has been the most disappointing player for your favorite NHL team, and what do you agree and disagree with my disappointing picks? Let us know. And of course, share the video with your friends, get it to all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click this card for all of my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. I will see you in the next video or stream. Have a good one, and goodbye.